talk about devastation, the one suffered by the Soviet Union during World War II takes all the awards there are. The most pessimistic figures state that up to 25 million people died, 14% of its pre-war population. 1,700 cities and 70,000 towns and villages were destroyed, as well as about 32,000 factories and industrial facilities. Likewise, 65,000 kilometers of railways were lost, and about 100,000 collective farms were looted. This does not include the more than 25 million people who were left homeless, in addition to schools, libraries, and hospitals destroyed by the German bombings. Despite all of this, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics not only won the war, but also established itself as one of the two superpowers during the Cold War. Unlike other allies, such as France or the United Kingdom, which lost their status as powers. I don't know about you, but as a World War II geek, I've always wondered about this. I'm not saying this because I'm a foot lover or to praise Mother Russia like some of my most loyal followers. But the Soviets' comeback was impressive. Isn't that admirable? Did you also wonder how on earth the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics managed to rise as a superpower despite so much destruction? Are you interested? Shall we? So, stay until the end of the video. First, let's get some context. The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics was founded as the first socialist state in history with a clear ideology that rivaled capitalism. However, this rivalry was nothing compared to the fierce hatred with Nazism. Maybe they even got along worse than Chavez and Bush. His name is George W. Bush. The rivalry was so intense that the Soviets ended up allying with the Western capitalist powers to defeat Nazi Germany. As you know, the German-Soviet War began when Adolf Hitler ordered the invasion of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, breaking the Ribbentrop-Molotov Non-Aggression Pact, through which they had divided up the territory, Poland. The Eastern Front was the biggest bloodbath of the war and included episodes like the Battle of Stalingrad, the bloodiest in history with 2 million dead. But it marked the turning point of the war. From that moment on, the Soviets never retreated again. Thus begins the beginning of the end of the National Socialist ideology, or maybe not quite. And let's be honest, even though Hollywood propaganda tries to give all the credit to Uncle Sam with movies of questionable historical accuracy, the Soviets were the real executioners of the Nazis. But at what cost? Extremely high, very high. The numbers we mentioned at the beginning speak for themselves. Let's talk a bit about the other three victorious Allied powers, the ones that occupied Germany after the victory. Even the dumbest person knows that the United States emerged as the other great superpower that rivaled the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics during the Cold War. The reasons? The main one is that the confrontations, except for a couple of exceptions, did not take place on its territory. This allowed it to keep its industrial infrastructure intact, and later, it didn't have to spend anything on rebuilding cities. By 1945, it was producing more than 50% of the world's gross domestic product and controlled about 2/3 of the gold reserves. Its economic power was so great that it promoted the Marshall Plan for the reconstruction of Western European countries, including the other two main victorious allies, France and the United Kingdom. After centuries of being two of the main overseas colonial empires, the end of the war marked the beginning of the decline of both. London was heavily bombed and its economy was left with an external debt of 270% of its gross domestic product. An immediate effect that demonstrated these cracks was the independence of its main colony, India, which was achieved 2 years after the war. France had a similar fate after being occupied by Germany for 4 years. This led to its international prestige being drastically weakened. As a domino effect, it had to face harsh wars of decolonization in Indochina and Algeria, which exhausted its last resources. By the 1970s, both powers had lost almost all their colonies in Africa and Asia. After the Suez Crisis, in which their plans were thwarted by pressure from the United States, they showed that they no longer made autonomous decisions, unlike the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Now it's time to answer the question from the video. How on earth did the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics manage to have such a different fate from that of the United Kingdom and France? Let's list the causes. First, centralized political control. Stalin's communist regime allowed for total mobilization of resources without any opposition. If you disapprove of my actions, you'll be sent to the Gulag. That's how the economy was reorganized with authoritarian efficiency, prioritizing industrial and military reconstruction. More military power, more deterrence power. Second, the occupied territories and the sphere of influence. While the United Kingdom and France lost their colonies, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics established a series of allied regimes in Eastern Europe, forming its own bloc of countries that joined its own institutions, such as the Warsaw Pact and Comecon. It achieved this because it was the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics itself that liberated these countries from Nazi occupation during its campaign on the Eastern Front. In contrast, France and the United Kingdom needed the support of the United States to advance on the Western Front. Third, war reparations. As the great victor over Germany, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics obtained industrial reparations from Germany, machinery, entire factories, and much of the scientific knowledge, which was also present in West Germany. Fourth, and very importantly, nuclear power. The aforementioned military reconstruction included that 4 years after the war, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics had developed its first atomic bomb, reaching strategic parity with the United States. The United States, who had already tested their atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. France and the United Kingdom obtained their own nuclear arsenals a few years later, but never, and to this day, matched the number of nuclear warheads of the Soviet power. Well, since they had the United States nuclear umbrella as NATO members, they didn't see the need for it. Fifth, an advantage that remains to this day is natural resources, while the United Kingdom and France were losing access to resources in their colonies. The latter, in quotation marks, the immense territory of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, filled with vast reserves of oil, gas, and arable land, allowed it to be self-sufficient, being less dependent on foreign trade and, above all, on the United States. Sixth and final reason, sacrifice and internal cohesion. The war unified the Soviet population under a narrative of historical resistance that the regime used to strengthen its political control. The role of the Red Army as the savior of Europe from fascism, it united the countless ethnicities of the country under a single identity, giving the Soviet government soft power, which the French and British had lost. So, how do you see the rise of the Soviet Union as a superpower? Despite having been devastated, it was due to a combination of factors that set it apart from the fate of France and the United Kingdom. In conclusion, the economy isn't everything when we talk about power and influence, but also military strength, soft power, and resource management. What other factor do you think influenced the hegemonic rise of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics? Don't forget to leave your comment and subscribe to the channel. I'm also including my social media links in the description. And if you want to watch the new videos in the premiere and have more interaction with me, your donations on Patreon, Una Manitonet, or channel memberships are welcome. See you next time.